When the world goes quiet, some voices still remain. Not every soul finds peace when the clock strikes 12. There are stories hidden in the shadows, whispers drifting between the living and the forgotten. Some stories linger, some souls don't leave. Welcome to Stillness After Midnight, where every silence tells a story. If you're drawn to the mysteries that stir after dark, the voices that echo when the world sleeps, subscribe now and join us as we listen to the souls who still have something to say, because in the stillness, the truth finally speaks. I still remember the first night I arrived in Beijing. The air was colder than I expected, thick with the smell of coal smoke and incense drifting from unseen temples. The taxi dropped me off in front of an old hotel tucked into a narrow street just beyond the main avenues. Unlike the polished glass towers of the modern city, this building seemed to belong to another century. Its facade was worn, the windows rimmed with peeling red paint, and the entrance was framed by two stone lions whose eyes had grown dull with dust. I had come to Beijing not as a tourist, but as a writer chasing stories. 32 years old, raised in the suburbs of Boston, I had built my career around collecting strange folklore. My last book had explored ghost legends in Japan, and my readers, mostly young Americans and Europeans hungry for something more than Hollywood horror, wanted me to go deeper into Asia's haunted places. When a fellow researcher in Hong Kong whispered about a hotel in Beijing, where guests vanished after following a woman in a red dress, I felt the kind of chill that writers secretly crave. That was why I was here. The lobby smelled faintly of sandalwood and damp wood. Lanterns hung from the ceiling, their yellow glow trembling as if the air itself was unsteady. Behind the counter stood a young receptionist, polite but strangely cautious, as if she wanted to warn me about something yet dared not speak too openly. She gave me my key with both hands and said only, "Room 602. Please, if you hear footsteps at night, do not open the door." At first I thought it was a translation issue, or perhaps a local superstition offered like a joke. But when I carried my suitcase toward the creaking elevator, I noticed an old man sweeping the floor nearby. He looked up, his eyes sharp, and muttered in Mandarin words I barely understood. Later, a friend would translate them for me. "If you see her, don't follow." The sixth-floor corridor stretched longer than it should have. The carpet was worn, patterned with faded chrysanthemums, and the wallpaper peeled in places to reveal the plaster beneath. The air felt heavy, as though time itself had thickened here. I passed door after identical door until I found mine. The key turned stiffly, and the room welcomed me with silence. My room was small but oddly elegant in a tired way. Dark wooden furniture, a narrow bed, a dressing table with a mirror clouded by age. A single red paper lantern hung outside the window, swaying in the breeze from the street below. Its glow bled into the room, staining the white curtains with the color of dried blood. I tried to laugh it off. Writers like me are too quick to see omens in ordinary things. But that night, after unpacking and setting down my notebook, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The walls seemed to breathe. The silence had a texture, as though it carried hidden sounds I couldn't quite catch. Around midnight I heard it, the faint echo of footsteps in the hall. Not heavy boots, not the shuffle of slippers, but the sharp, deliberate rhythm of wooden heels. Clack, 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 like someone walking in traditional shoes. The sound came closer, paused, then faded away again. I stood frozen beside the door, my ear pressed to the wood. The corridor outside was utterly silent. When I finally dared to peek through the peephole, all I saw was the dim light flickering at the end of the hallway. The carpet was empty. Sleep was difficult. My dreams tangled with images of long corridors, women's laughter echoing from behind thin walls, and a red figure always just beyond my reach. When I woke, the lantern outside my window was still swaying, though there was no wind. The next morning, over a bowl of congee in the hotel restaurant, I tried to dismiss it as jet lag. That was when a middle-aged waiter approached my table. His English was broken, but his tone carried urgency. "You are a writer?" he asked, gesturing at the notebook beside my bowl. I nodded. Then, you must hear this. People disappear here. They follow her, always her. A woman in red, end of hall. You see, you must not walk. His hand trembled as he poured me tea, and then he hurried away before I could ask more. That was the second warning in less than 24 hours. And as any storyteller knows, when a legend insists on finding you, it is never wise to ignore it. That day I wandered through the city, hoping distraction would loosen the grip of the hotel's strange atmosphere. Beijing was alive with contradictions. Neon billboards flashing above markets that smelled of incense and roasted chestnuts, skyscrapers towering over crumbling hutong alleys. Yet even in the heart of that chaos, I carried with me the echo of those wooden heels. It clung to me like smoke. By evening, I returned to the hotel, exhausted but uneasy. The receptionist avoided my eyes when I asked about the history of the building. She only said, "Old house, many stories," and quickly shifted the subject to breakfast hours. Something in her reluctance told me more than words could. That night, as I sat at the desk writing, I became aware of the mirror across the room. It was framed in dark wood, the glass slightly warped. At first, it showed only my reflection bent over the page. But when I lifted my eyes, I thought I saw movement at the very edge of it, something red fluttering, like silk. I turned quickly. Nothing, just the curtain trembling against the closed window. The sound of footsteps came again, more distinct than before. Clack, clack, clack. Slow, patient, deliberate. They stopped directly outside my door. I held my breath. The handle did not turn, but I swear I heard a woman's whisper, faint as if carried through water. Words I could not understand, drawn out and soft, like a lullaby. Then silence. I stood there for a long time, my ear pressed against the door, heart thundering. When courage finally returned, I opened it. The hallway was empty, but at the far end, where the corridor bent into shadow, I saw it, the brief outline of a figure, a dress, crimson as fresh lacquer, vanishing into the dark. The next morning, curiosity gnawed at me. I sought out the old man I had seen sweeping the lobby. He was in the courtyard, feeding sparrows with a handful of seeds. His face was lined, his eyes sharp despite the years. I asked him, in halting Mandarin and with gestures, about the woman in red. He looked at me for a long time, then sighed. "She waits," he said finally, his English rough but clear enough. "Always waiting. At the end of hall." "For whom?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not whom. Anyone. She chooses. Foreigners, locals, it does not matter. They follow and they do not come back." His hand trembled as he scattered the last of the seeds. "In China, red is for celebration, wedding, festival, life. But here, red is warning, red is blood. If you see her, do not follow." The words chilled me more than the footsteps had, because they carried the weight of belief, not invention. That night I kept my notebook close, determined to document every detail. But writing did not steady me. The silence of the hotel pressed in, thick as water. Even the city noises seemed muffled, as if the building had separated itself from Beijing entirely. Around midnight, the lantern outside my window flickered violently, though the air was still. Shadows crawled along the curtains, shapes that did not match the furniture. And then, once again, the sound began. Clack, clack, clack. This time it did not pause. The steps moved steadily down the hall, passing my door, fading, then returning. Back and forth, as though pacing. I forced myself to stay in the room. Every instinct screamed to look, but the warnings echoed louder. If you see her, don't follow. Yet in that suspended silence, I realized something. The story was no longer just research. I was inside it now, a participant. When dawn finally bled pale light into the curtains, I had not slept. The footsteps had ceased, but the echo remained in my chest like a second heartbeat. I knew then that my journey in Beijing would not be the usual gathering of folklore. This was not a tale to be written from the outside. It was something that demanded I step into it, something that wanted me. And deep down, though I told myself otherwise, I also knew it was only a matter of time before I would see her again. I woke with the sense that I had not truly slept. My body ached, and my thoughts drifted between dream and waking. The lantern outside the window had gone dark, yet a faint red glow seemed to linger in the room, as if the walls themselves remembered the color. The corridor was quiet when I stepped out to fetch coffee, yet silence in this building was never complete. It had a texture, a density, as though beneath the hush there lay a second layer of sound, hidden, waiting. That evening, after hours of wandering Beijing's crowded streets, I returned to the hotel with my nerves dulled by exhaustion. But as I entered the elevator, a young woman slipped in behind me. She wore a staff uniform, plain gray with a brass name tag, and she kept her eyes fixed on the floor. "You should not stay here long," she murmured in English so soft I almost missed it. I turned to her. "Why not?" She hesitated, then glanced upward as though the very walls were listening. "The halls, they whisper. When they call you, you must not answer." Before I could ask her anything else, the elevator doors opened on the 6th floor. She slipped away quickly, vanishing around the corner. Her words stayed with me. The halls whisper. That night, I left my door cracked open. Not wide, just enough to let the silence of the corridor seep in. I told myself it was research, that I wanted to experience whatever guests had described before. But in truth, I was curious in the way people are curious about the edge of a cliff. They want to know how it feels to lean forward, even though they know the fall could kill them. At first there was nothing, only the faint hum of the city outside. Then slowly I began to hear it, a faint susurration, like silk brushing against stone. It was not quite words, not quite wind. I held my breath. The sound grew clearer. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, as though the building was breathing secrets. My heart hammered. I leaned closer to the gap of the door. That was when the footsteps returned. Clack, clack, clack. They came steadily from the far end of the hall. My mouth went dry. Through the narrow crack, I saw her, the woman in red. She stood at the far end of the corridor, her back to me. Her dress was vivid, the fabric heavy as if soaked in water. Her black hair spilled down her back, gleaming faintly under the weak ceiling lights. She began to walk slowly, the sound of her wooden heels echoing in time with my heartbeat. Every instinct screamed at me to shut the door, to hide, to pray. But my eyes stayed fixed. The air grew thick, and for a moment I thought I heard words carried on her steps. Soft, rhythmic whispers that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Come closer!" I slammed the door. My hands shook so violently I could barely lock it. For long minutes I leaned against the wood, waiting. The footsteps stopped, but the whispering did not. It slipped through the cracks, curling around me like smoke. My chest tightened as if invisible fingers pressed against it. The words were not in English, not in Mandarin, not in any language I knew. Yet somehow I understood. They were not commands. They were invitations. Come and see. Come and follow. I pressed my palms against my ears, but the whispers seeped inside my skull. The air smelled faintly of incense and iron, like burnt offerings left too long at a shrine. Then just as suddenly as it had begun, the sound ceased. Silence returned, thick and heavy. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I sat at the desk, scribbling every detail, every sound, every flicker of shadow. Yet the more I wrote, the more unreal it seemed, as though the act of putting it on paper stripped it of truth. And still, I could feel her presence lingering beyond the door, patient, waiting. The following morning, my nerves frayed, I sought answers from the staff. Most avoided me, their faces tightening whenever I mentioned the 6th floor. But one, a bellboy no older than 20, leaned closer as he carried my suitcase back from storage. "She is real," he whispered, "not ghost only. She is curse. What do you mean? I asked. He glanced around, then lowered his voice further. Long time ago, woman die here. Not by choice. She walk forever now. Hotel try to forget, but she will not. Do people really disappear? His eyes darkened. Yes. Foreigners, Chinese, anyone. They follow her. Always end of hall. They do not come back. He hurried away before I could ask more. That night the hotel felt different. The lights in the corridor flickered more than usual, buzzing faintly like dying insects. The carpet seemed darker, as though soaked through. Again the footsteps came. Clack, clack, clack. But this time they did not move away. They stopped directly outside my door. I froze. Through the wood I could hear her breathing. Slow, calm, patient. Then came a whisper so close it might have been inside the room. I know you hear me. My skin went cold. I backed away, but the whisper followed, curling into the corners of the room. I know you see me. The mirror on the dressing table shimmered faintly, as though touched by unseen hands. For an instant I thought I saw her reflection there, standing not in the hall but behind me. When I turned, the room was empty, but in the mirror the red figure lingered a heartbeat longer before fading. By dawn I was trembling with exhaustion, yet one truth had etched itself into my mind. She was aware of me. I was no longer a witness. I was a participant in her endless game. And deep inside, a question began to form, a question that frightened me more than her whispers. How long before I would be the one to follow? The third day in Beijing began with a heaviness in my chest, the kind that lingers after restless sleep. I had not truly rested since I checked into the hotel. My notebook was filling with fragments, scraps of whispers, half-drawn sketches of the woman in red, descriptions of footsteps that no one else seemed to hear. But I needed more than my own impressions. Legends are born in the mouths of others, shaped by repetition and fear. So I decided to spend the day gathering stories from those who lived in the shadow of the hotel. The streets around the building were narrow, lined with vendors selling candied hawthorn skewers, steamed buns, and paper charms printed with Taoist symbols. Old bicycles leaned against brick walls, their chains rusted, their baskets filled with wilted chrysanthemums. I stopped at a tea house across the street, a dim room fragrant with oolong and tobacco smoke. When I asked the waiter if he had ever heard of the woman in red, his expression shifted. He glanced toward the door, then lowered his voice. She waits in the hall, yes? At the end? I nodded. My uncle saw her once, he said. Long ago, maybe 20 years. He was young, working in the kitchen. One night he stayed too late. When he walked back to his room, he saw a woman standing under the lantern. Red dress, long hair. He thought she was guest. He tried to ask if she was lost. She only turned her head and smiled. He felt pulled, as if rope around his chest, but his friend grabbed his arm and dragged him away. Next morning there were scratches on his skin, like nails. He quit the job that day. The waiter poured my tea with shaking hands. Others not so lucky. Some never leave. Later that afternoon, I returned to the hotel courtyard, where the old man still swept the stones. I asked him to tell me what he knew. He leaned on his broom, staring at the gray sky. In 1998, he said slowly, 2 tourists from Germany disappeared. They stayed 3 nights. On the 4th, they were gone. Their belongings still in the room. Police looked everywhere. No sign. Some say they followed her. He spat on the ground as though to ward off the memory. I have seen her myself, once, long time ago. She's not woman anymore. She is hunger. She walks because she cannot stop. She chooses those who see her. If she chooses you, he let the words trail off. Why red? I asked, his eyes darkened. Red is wedding color. In old times, bride wore red veil, red dress. But also, when women were wronged, sometimes they dyed in red to curse those who hurt them. She may be bride, or she may be curse. I do not know. Only this. She does not forgive. His voice cracked, and he returned to sweeping, as though the conversation had ended. That evening, I sat in the lobby, pretending to read while watching the guests. Families checked in, businessmen scrolled through phones, travelers dragged heavy suitcases across the worn carpet. None of them seemed aware of the weight pressing down on the building. Then a man in his 50s sat across from me. He was Chinese, but his English was careful and deliberate. "You are foreigner," he said. "You are staying here because of the story, yes?" I admitted it. He leaned closer. "My brother stayed here once. He was young, foolish, wanted to see ghosts. He told me he heard footsteps. He followed, only a few steps, enough to see her face. He said it was beautiful but wrong. Eyes empty, smile too wide. After that night, he was not the same. He left the hotel, but the woman, she followed him in dreams. He stopped eating. He said she stood at the foot of his bed. One morning he did not wake. Doctor said heart stopped. But I know, she took him. The man's eyes shone with unshed tears. You should leave before she chooses you." Back in my room, I replayed their words over and over. The uncle who bore scratches, the German tourist who vanished, the brother who died of a stopped heart. Each story was a thread, weaving into something larger than myth. But the most unsettling part was this. Every story ended unfinished. No one knew where the missing had gone. No one knew what the woman in red truly wanted. Only that once she appeared, escape was unlikely. I sat at the desk and wrote by lantern light, the red glow staining my pages. My notes looked less like research and more like confession. I could not deny it anymore. She was real. Around midnight, as I closed the notebook, the silence shifted again. Not footsteps this time, not whispers, but laughter, soft, delicate, and unbearably sad, floating down the hall like the echo of a forgotten wedding song. My blood ran cold, because I realized then she was not just in the hall, she was already inside the stories, and stories never let go once you step into them. By the fourth night, the hotel no longer felt like a place I was visiting. It felt like a place I had been absorbed into, its walls breathing with me, its silence pressing against my skin like damp cloth. The air carried a faint perfume of incense and something metallic, like iron left out in the rain. I knew she would come. Every night had led me closer. Warnings no longer mattered. The question was not if, but when. That evening I returned from a late walk through the hutongs. The alleys were deserted, paper lanterns swaying gently in the breeze, their flames sputtering. A dog barked once, then fell silent, as if scolded by an invisible hand. When I stepped into the hotel lobby, the receptionist froze for half a second, then quickly lowered her gaze, as though she had seen something behind me. "Good night," she said, but her voice cracked. The elevator ride to the 6th floor felt endless. The bulb inside flickered, casting my reflection across the metal walls in broken fragments. For a moment I thought one of those reflections moved out of sync. When the doors opened, the corridor lay stretched before me, carpet worn, lights humming faintly. A draft whispered along the hall, though no window was open. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and sat on the bed without turning on the light. The lantern outside painted the curtains red, casting shadows that looked too tall, too thin. Then I heard it. Clack, clack, clack. The sound was slower tonight, each step measured, deliberate, echoing with more weight than before. I felt it reverberate in my chest. I forced myself to the door. My hands trembled, but some part of me wanted proof. I needed to know if the stories were real or if exhaustion had finally broken me. I pressed my eye to the peephole, and there she was. At the far end of the corridor, beneath the flickering light, stood the woman in red. She was taller than I expected, her posture both graceful and rigid, like a marionette held by unseen strings. Her dress clung to her body as though wet, the fabric gleaming darkly. Her hair, black as ink, fell in heavy waves down her back, nearly touching the floor. She did not move. She simply stood there facing me. Though the distance was long, I felt her eyes lock onto mine. The air between us grew heavy, thick, as if the hall itself had collapsed into a tunnel leading only to her. Her lips curved, not into a smile, but into something more ambiguous, an invitation or a warning. I staggered back, my breath ragged, Yet the moment I moved away, I heard the whisper. Closer! The word was not in English, not in Mandarin, but inside my head it arrived whole, unmistakable. I dared another glance through the peephole. She was nearer, only a few paces, but unmistakably closer. Her head tilted slightly, her hair shifting like liquid. The corridor's lights dimmed as though her presence drew the power from the building. Clack. Another step. Clack. Another. I stumbled backward until my shoulders struck the dresser. The mirror rattled, and in its warped glass, I saw her not at the end of the corridor, but standing directly behind me. I spun around. The room was empty. But when I turned back to the mirror, she lingered there a moment longer, her red sleeve brushing the edge of the frame, before vanishing. I sat on the bed until dawn, unable to move, my body trembling with a mix of terror and awe. For the first time, I understood what the locals meant. She was not merely an echo or a shadow. She was aware, deliberate, choosing her moments with precision. She had seen me, and worse, she had wanted me to see her. When morning light finally crept through the curtains, I found something on the floor near the door. A single thread of red silk, curled like a question mark. I picked it up carefully, but the thread dissolved in my fingers, leaving only the faint scent of smoke and roses. It was no longer possible to dismiss this as imagination. I had seen her. I had been marked. And though every story warned against following, I already knew. One night I would. By the fifth night, I had learned to recognize the subtle shift in the air that announced her approach. It was not just footsteps. It was pressure, like the weight of unseen water filling the hall. The silence before her was so profound, it seemed to erase the ordinary world. But that night, something different happened. I was in the lobby, notebook in hand, when a voice beside me spoke in halting English. "You are writing about her?" I turned. A man sat 2 seats away, his shoulders hunched, his eyes bloodshot. He looked European, perhaps in his early 40s. His hands trembled as he lit a cigarette, though the sign above his head clearly forbade it. I nodded. "The woman in red?" His gaze sharpened, filled with something between recognition and fear. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I saw her." He said it the way men confess sins. We walked to the small courtyard outside, where the lanterns swayed. He told me his name was Daniel from Poland. He had come to Beijing for work nearly a decade ago, and against all warnings he had stayed in this very hotel. "It was late," he said, his accent thick. "I was drunk, yes, foolish. I heard the sound, heels, slow, echoing. I thought maybe a woman, another guest. I followed." His cigarette burned fast in his fingers. "She was there, at the end of the corridor. Long red dress. Too red. I called to her. No answer. I walked closer." His voice dropped. When I reached halfway, she turned her head. Her face, he stopped, inhaled sharply. Not human, or maybe too human, like all faces at once, beautiful and terrible. Her eyes were black holes, and when she opened her mouth, he fell silent, shaking. "What happened?" I asked gently. "I woke up in my room. My clothes were wet, as if I had been drowned. My skin smelled of incense, and there were marks." He pulled back his sleeve, revealing faint scars across his arm, like long fingers pressing too hard. "I left the next morning, but she—" He exhaled smoke. "She followed, not in daylight, at night, in dreams, for months. Sometimes I saw her in glass, in shop windows, in puddles on the street, always behind me, never gone. He crushed the cigarette violently. I came back this week. I don't know why. Maybe to end it. Maybe to ask her what she wants. But now I see you writing, and I wonder, perhaps she will choose you instead. His eyes glimmered with something like pity. That night I could not shake Daniel's story. I returned to my room and sat in darkness, every nerve waiting. The thread of silk I had found yesterday still haunted me. What if it had been a sign, not a warning, but a tether? The whispers came again, not footsteps this time. Whispers. They rose from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, until the whole room seemed to breathe them. A chorus of voices, yet all belonging to her. You saw me. The lamp flickered, the glass trembling. You heard me. The mirror on the dresser clouded over, as though mist swirled within. For a moment I saw Daniel's reflection, not mine, standing in my place, his eyes wide with terror. Behind him the red figure loomed, her hand resting on his shoulder. I blinked, and it was gone. Only my face stared back, pale and hollow. You will follow. The words coiled through my skull like smoke. I pressed my palms to my ears, whispered prayers I barely remembered. Yet deep inside, I knew resistance was useless. The stories from the waiter, the old man, the grieving brother, all of them pointed to the same truth. She does not hunt, she waits, and once you see her, the waiting belongs to you. When dawn came, I met Daniel again in the courtyard. His face was haggard, his cigarette trembling. She spoke to me, he whispered. Last night, she said my name. I stared at him, chilled. She spoke to me too. He nodded slowly, like a man hearing the verdict he already expected. Then it has begun. By the sixth night, I no longer questioned whether I was imagining things. The woman in red was real. Her whispers, her footsteps, the silk thread that dissolved in my hand. Daniel's haunted face was proof enough, but one question gnawed at me, more dangerous than curiosity itself. Where does she lead those who follow? The answer, I suspected, lay behind a door. For days I had noticed it at the end of the sixth-floor corridor. Unlike the others, this door was sealed. No number, no handle, only an old brass lock crusted with rust. It looked as though it had not been opened in decades. Yet every time I walked past, I felt a pull, a draft colder than the rest of the hall. That morning I asked the receptionist about it. She stiffened, her eyes darting to the bellboy. That door is storage, she said too quickly. No entry. When I pressed her, she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Do not ask again. It is not for you. But once a secret reveals its outline, it is impossible to ignore. That evening, Daniel approached me in the courtyard. He looked worse than before, skin pale, eyes rimmed in red. I dreamt of it, he said. The door. She stood beside it, waiting. She whispered that inside is where it began. I told him I had seen the same door. His expression tightened. Then it calls us both. At midnight, the hotel was silent, the other guests long asleep. Daniel and I crept into the corridor, our footsteps muffled on the worn carpet. The lights flickered as we neared the end of the hall. The door loomed before us, brass lock dull under the weak bulb. I reached out, half expecting it to resist. But when my fingers brushed the metal, the lock clicked open by itself, as though expecting me. A cold draft seeped out, carrying the faint smell of ashes and roses. We exchanged a glance, then pushed the door. Inside lay a narrow staircase, descending into darkness. The walls were lined with old wallpaper, peeling to reveal brick beneath. Our footsteps echoed unnaturally, each sound swallowed as though the building itself were listening. At the bottom we found a chamber. It was small, no larger than a storage room, yet the air was heavy with incense long extinguished. On the far wall hung a torn red veil, stained darker at the edges. Beneath it stood an old table, covered in melted wax and broken porcelain bowls. An altar, Daniel whispered. I stepped closer. The bowls had once held offerings, rice, fruit, perhaps wine, but now they were dry, brittle with age. A single wooden comb lay on the table, its teeth broken. The veil stirred, though no wind touched it. That was when we heard her. Clack, clack, clack. Footsteps descending the stairs, slow, certain. Daniel's eyes widened. She's here! The veil lifted, and behind it, a shadow formed, tall, draped in red. I could not move. My body froze, my heart hammering. The figure stepped forward, her hair spilling across her shoulders, her face hidden beneath the veil. Her whispers filled the chamber, curling around us like smoke. This is where I waited. This is where I was left. Daniel stumbled back, his breath ragged. She was a bride, he whispered, abandoned, buried in red. The figure tilted her head as if acknowledging his words. Then slowly she raised her hand. The veil on the wall trembled, and the air thickened with the scent of burnt roses. You opened the door. Now you belong. I grabbed Daniel's arm, dragging him toward the stairs, but the steps stretched impossibly long, as if the building had shifted. Each stride carried us nowhere. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, until they drowned out thought. Then, silence. We found ourselves back in the corridor, the door shut behind us. The lock gleamed as though untouched. Daniel collapsed against the wall, gasping. She won't let us leave now, he muttered. We opened her room. I pressed my forehead to the door, trembling. From within, faint and steady, came the sound of wooden heels pacing slowly across stone. Clack, clack, clack. She was waiting still. I could not close my eyes after the night of the forbidden door. Even when I forced them shut, the image of the veil lingered. Red cloth trembling as though breathing. The comb with broken teeth. The voice that whispered, "This is where I was left." She had not been a ghost in the beginning. She had been a woman. And women do not wear red veils in mourning. They wear them on their wedding day. The following morning, Daniel and I sat in the courtyard, our tea untouched. His hand shook so badly he spilled half the cup before setting it down. She was a bride, he murmured. It makes sense now. That is why the dress, the veil. In China, red is joy, red is binding. But also, his voice faltered, when someone dies wearing red, it is curse. The soul cannot move on. It clings, seeking vengeance. I recalled the old man's words. Red is wedding color, but also curse. Do you think she was abandoned? I asked. Daniel shook his head. No, worse. I think she was betrayed. That evening, I sought answers from the bellboy, the one who had warned me days before. At first, he refused, shaking his head violently. But when I pressed money into his hand, his resolve cracked. Long ago, he whispered, before hotel, there was house here. Rich merchant's family. Daughter promised to man. But he did not want her. He wanted her dowry. On wedding night, he locked her in chamber, alone. She begged, cried. He left. She died by her own hand, they say. Hung the red veil on wall, cursed family. The house burned years later, but she stayed. When hotel built, they used same ground, same hall, same room. His eyes darted toward the 6th floor. Now she waits for anyone foolish enough to follow. That night I dreamed of her. In the dream, I stood in a wedding hall. The lanterns glowed red, casting shadows like blood across the floor. Guests sat faceless at the tables, their hands motionless, their silence deafening. At the altar stood the bride. Her veil covered her face, heavy and trembling. She raised her hands, and I saw rope burns circling her wrists, bruises blooming like dark flowers. When she lifted the veil, her face was not monstrous, only unbearably sad. Her lips moved, but the sound that came out was not words, but the steady rhythm of wooden heels. Clack, clack, clack. I woke with tears on my cheeks and the echo of her footsteps inside my skull. Daniel, too, had dreamed of her. He told me the next morning, his voice hoarse. She showed me her face. She asked me to follow her. She said she had waited long enough. I asked if he had agreed. He did not answer. That evening, the whispers began earlier than usual. Not just outside my door, but inside my room, curling through the cracks in the floor. Betrayal, abandonment, justice. Each word struck like a drumbeat. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. I stumbled to the desk, trying to write, but the pen scratched nonsense, my hand no longer obeying. The mirror on the wall darkened. Shapes formed within. A wedding procession, faceless men carrying red lanterns, a groom in black robes. But the bride walked alone, her steps unsteady, her veil stained. "Will you follow?" the whisper asked. I clutched the pen so hard it snapped. Ink spilled across my notes like blood. Daniel knocked on my door near midnight. His eyes were wild, fevered. "She called me," he said. "She promised peace. No more dreams, no more whispers. If I follow, it ends." I grabbed his shoulders. "No one who follows comes back." "Maybe that is mercy," his voice cracked. "You don't understand. She never stops. Always behind me. Always waiting. If she wants me, I'd rather go willingly." Before I could stop him, he turned and walked down the hall. The air grew heavy, thick with incense. At the far end, she stood waiting, her veil glowing faintly under the dim light. Daniel took a step, then another. "Don't!" I shouted, but my voice was swallowed by the corridor. He never looked back. I slammed my door and collapsed against it, heart pounding. From beyond, I heard the rhythm of two sets of footsteps now, hers and his, echoing together. Then silence. When I opened the door minutes later, the hall was empty. Only the faintest trace of red silk lingered on the carpet, dissolving as I watched. Daniel was gone. I returned to my desk, shaking. The curse was clearer than ever. She was not random, not senseless. She sought companionship in her endless waiting, binding others to the same fate she had suffered. A bride abandoned becomes a bride forever seeking. And once you step into her hall, you are no longer guest. You are groom, chosen or not. The whispers rose again, soft but insistent, curling around me like vows. "You will not leave me." And in that moment, I feared Daniel was not the last. He was only the first. Daniel's disappearance left a hollow space in the hotel. It was not only that his room was suddenly empty, or that his name no longer appeared on the guest list. It was the way people behaved, as if he had never existed. The receptionist did not remember him. The bellboy shook his head when I asked. Even the waiter at the tea house swore no foreigner by that description had ever stayed here. But I remembered. I could still hear the echo of his footsteps, walking toward her. For 2 days, I wandered Beijing in a haze. The markets bustled, incense burned at temple gates, children laughed in the courtyards of the hutongs. Yet everywhere I felt the weight of absence. Daniel's voice, his trembling hands, the scars on his arm, gone, as if swallowed by the city. I wrote his name in my notebook over and over, afraid that if I stopped, he too would fade from my memory. On the third night after he vanished, I awoke to the sound of knocking. Not at my door, at the window. I live on the 6th floor. The glass rattled, a faint rhythm, like fingertips brushing it. When I dared to look, I saw only the reflection of the lantern outside. But within that reflection, another shape formed. Daniel, pale and hollow-eyed, standing beside her. His mouth opened soundlessly, pleading. The woman in red held his arm as if presenting him to me, her veil shimmering faintly. Then the reflection dissolved, leaving only my own terrified face. I knew then that the curse was not content with erasing him. It wanted me too. The next morning, I searched his room. Housekeeping had already stripped it bare. No luggage, no clothes, not even a receipt at the front desk. Yet in the wardrobe, behind the empty hangers, I found something small. A comb, wooden, with broken teeth. The same kind I had seen on the altar behind the forbidden door. I held it carefully, but the wood felt warm, pulsing faintly as though alive. A strand of dark hair clung to it, longer than Daniel's could ever be. I dropped it, my stomach twisting. That evening, the hotel felt emptier than ever. The corridors stretched too long, the lights too dim. Every door I passed seemed untrustworthy, as though behind each one waited silence heavy enough to crush me. At the end of the hall, the forbidden door stood still, brass locks shining, veils stirring in memory. I forced myself back to my room, but when I opened my notebook, I found that Daniel's name had faded from the page. The ink that once spelled Daniel was now nothing but faint gray smudges. I tried to rewrite it, pressing hard, but each time the letters blurred until they vanished. The curse was erasing him from the world, and I feared I was next. That night, I did not sleep. I sat with the lantern lit, notebook open, pen in hand, determined to write everything I remembered before it too was stolen. Hours passed. Silence thickened. Then I heard it again. Clack, clack, clack. This time it came not from the corridor but from inside my room. I froze, pen hovering. The sound circled me, though no one was there. In the mirror above the desk, the reflection twisted. The room was the same, but empty of me. Instead, Daniel stood at the desk, writing furiously. Behind him, the woman in red leaned over his shoulder, guiding his hand with her long fingers. I shut my eyes, whispering, "This isn't real. This isn't real." When I opened them, the reflection was normal again, but the notebook in front of me had changed. My handwriting was not mine. It read, "Follow and you will not be forgotten." I left the room at dawn, shaken beyond reason. I walked the streets aimlessly, afraid to return. Yet everywhere I went, I caught glimpses of red. A scarf in the market, a silk dress in a shop window, lanterns swaying above the temple gate. Each time my chest clenched, certain it was her. By the time I staggered back to the hotel, the sun was setting. The sky glowed crimson, the same shade as her dress. In the lobby, no one looked at me. It was as though I too were already fading. That night, as I lay awake, I understood what vanishing meant. It was not death. It was erasure. The curse did not simply claim lives. It devoured memory. To follow her was to be forgotten, to dissolve until only whispers remained. And I realized with dread, certainty, Daniel had not been the first. He would not be the last. The woman in red was building a procession, an endless wedding march through the silence of forgotten halls. And now I had already been chosen to walk beside her. By the ninth night, I no longer trusted myself. Shadows lengthened faster, whispers crept closer, and Daniel's face haunted every reflective surface. The city bustled beyond the hotel walls, but to me, Beijing had shrunk into a labyrinth of corridors, red silk, and fading names. I knew if I did nothing, I too would vanish. It was the old man in the courtyard who gave me hope. He had always seemed half part of the building, sweeping dust that returned each day, feeding sparrows that scattered at nightfall. This time, when I approached him, he did not avoid my eyes. "You saw her," he said simply. I nodded. "You opened her door." Again I nodded. He sighed, shoulders sinking under invisible weight. "Then you carry her mark. But there is a way, not to banish, never banish, but to delay, to keep your name from fading." The lantern ritual. That evening, he led me through the Hutong alleys. We passed noodle shops closing for the night, vendors snuffing candles, the smell of soy and smoke clinging to the air. Finally, we reached a small temple wedged between crumbling walls, its entrance lit by two red lanterns. Inside, the air was heavy with incense. Rows of paper talismans fluttered like fragile wings. The old man motioned for me to kneel before a low altar. Upon it lay an inkstone, brushes, and a stack of blank lantern papers. "You must write your name," he said. "Write it clear, with breath and soul. Then light the lantern and send it to the sky. If the flame burns steady, she cannot erase you. For a time." I dipped the brush into ink. My hand trembled as I wrote, "Michael Green." Each stroke felt heavy, as though carving into myself. The old man placed the paper into a lantern frame, lit the candle within, and carried it outside. Together we released it into the night. I watched as it rose slowly, swaying, until it joined dozens of others drifting above the city. My chest loosened for the first time in days. But then, my lantern flickered. For a moment I thought it would go dark, but it steadied, glowing faintly among the others. The old man nodded. She will not take you tonight, but remember, the ritual is not shield, only delay. So long as her hall stands, so long as the veil hangs, the bride will wait. That night I slept, truly slept. No whispers, no footsteps, no red veils in the mirror. Only silence, but the relief was fragile. The next morning when I passed the courtyard, I found the old man slumped against the wall. His broom lay beside him, untouched. His chest no longer rose. In his lap rested a torn scrap of red silk. I carried it with me, though I dared not understand its meaning. Perhaps it was a gift, perhaps a warning. The hotel staff spoke of his death with indifference, as though he too had been forgotten long ago. Yet I remembered his words, the ritual, the lantern burning faintly above Beijing's rooftops. Still, I could not shake the thought. What if the ritual had not saved me at all? What if it had only marked me more clearly, the way a groom's name is written on a wedding contract? That evening I returned to my room. On the desk lay my notebook, though I had locked it away. It was open to a blank page. In the center, written in delicate strokes of red, was my name. But it was not in my handwriting, and beneath it, in smaller script, "Now we are bound." The lantern may have risen to the sky, but its flame was already hers. I realized then the truth the old man had not spoken aloud. The ritual was never about protection. It was about acknowledgement. By writing my name, by sending it into the night, I had signed it over. I was hers as surely as Daniel had been. And somewhere, beyond the locked door and the forgotten chamber, the woman in red whispered her vows into the silence, waiting for me to follow. After the lantern ritual, the mirror became my greatest enemy. It no longer reflected me as I was. It reflected me as I would become. At first, the changes were subtle. When I combed my hair in the morning, the reflection lingered a moment too long after I moved. When I closed my eyes to wash my face, I could feel my reflection still watching me. Then one night, I saw her again, not in the corridor, but standing behind me in the glass. The woman in red, veil trembling, her long fingers resting on my shoulders. I spun around. No one. But when I looked back into the mirror, her hands were still there. I tried to cover the mirror with a cloth. By morning, the cloth lay folded neatly on the desk, as though placed there by careful hands. That evening, I smashed it. Glass shattered across the floor. Relief filled me until I looked again. The shards still reflected her veil, scattered into 100 fragments. Each piece showed a different angle. Her feet, her hands, the hollow beneath the cloth where her face should be. And in the largest shard, I saw not her, but Daniel. His lips moved silently, begging, though no sound reached me. I gathered the shards into a box, meaning to throw them away. But when I carried the box outside, I found myself unable to step past the lobby doors. My feet locked, my chest tightened. She did not want me to leave. I returned the shards to my room. That night, they rearranged themselves across the desk, forming a crude oval, a mirror once more. Within it, I saw a procession. Dozens of figures walked through endless corridors, their faces hidden under red veils. Some were men, some women, all bound by silence. At their head, the bride moved slowly, her heels striking the stone. Clack, clack, clack. Among them I recognized Daniel, veil draped over his bowed head. When he lifted it, his eyes were hollow, already fading. He raised a hand, beckoning. The whispers returned stronger than ever. "You are groom. You are chosen. Follow." My body shook with the urge to obey. My hand reached for the doorknob before I realized it. I forced myself back, gripping the desk until my knuckles split. But the mirror showed otherwise. In its reflection, I had already opened the door. I had already stepped into the corridor, and behind me, the procession waited. The next day, desperate, I visited a scholar of folklore at a Beijing university, an old professor I had corresponded with before my trip. He welcomed me kindly, though his eyes grew sharp when I described the woman in red. "You are speaking of the Hong Yi Gui," he said, "the red-dressed ghost. In Chinese belief, one who dies in red becomes restless, unable to cross into peace. They return, binding others to their fate." He leaned forward. "But the mirror, that is more ancient. In some traditions, mirrors are gates for the soul. They hold not only reflection, but passage. To see her there means she is no longer bound to the corridor. She has entered your world." I asked him what I could do. He shook his head. "There is no banishment, only bargain." When I returned to the hotel, the mirror shards gleamed faintly, as though heated from within. They pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. The largest shard now showed a wedding hall, lanterns glowing crimson. At the altar stood two figures. One was the bride, the other, me. Veil draped over my face, hands bound by red silk. The whisper coiled in the room, soft as breath against my ear. "The mirror is the door. Step through, and you are mine." I closed the notebook with shaking hands. My words no longer felt like protection. They were invitations, each stroke tying me tighter to her vow. The mirror was not just showing me what could happen. It was showing me what had already begun. And deep inside, beneath the fear, I felt a pull. Not resistance, but longing. A part of me wondered if it was easier to join the procession, to vanish like Daniel, to become another veil among many, to stop struggling, to stop remembering. But another part whispered louder still. If I followed, no one would ever know I had been. To vanish is not death. It is to be forgotten, and that I could not accept. The mirror no longer waited for night. By day it shimmered faintly, tugging at the corner of my vision. By dusk it opened wide, showing not my reflection, but the endless hallway where she walked. The veil swayed, the heels struck, and every time, the corridor seemed closer. On the 11th night, I knew resistance would not hold. The lantern ritual had delayed nothing. The mirror bargain had already been struck. I lit the oil lamp beside my bed and sat waiting. When the clock in the lobby struck midnight, the air shifted. The lamp flame bent sideways as though pulled by a draft. The corridor in the mirror widened until it filled the room. And then I heard it. Clack, clack, clack. The sound no longer belonged to glass. It belonged to stone beneath her feet. She was coming. I forced myself into the hall. The hotel lay silent, every door shut, every bulb flickering weakly. The carpet stretched long and narrow, swallowing sound. At the far end I saw her, the woman in red. She stood with her back to me, veil trailing, posture straight as though awaiting a groom. Slowly she began to walk. Each step echoed, clack, 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 measured, deliberate. I should have turned back, but I followed. The corridor grew longer with every step, the walls bending, lanterns flickering as though underwater. Doors appeared where none had been before, their brass numbers spinning in dizzying sequence. 304, 617, 102, 413. No matter how many I passed, the end never came closer. Still, the red dress swayed ahead. Her whispers seeped into the air. You opened the door. You lit the lantern. You wrote your name. All vows are binding. I clutched the fragment of silk the old man had left me. It felt warm, pulsing like a heartbeat. The deeper I walked, the more the corridor shifted. The wallpaper peeled to reveal brick, then stone. The carpet frayed into dust. The ceiling lamps gave way to hanging lanterns, glowing dim red. And then I realized this was no hotel corridor. It was a passage between worlds. At last the woman stopped. Before her rose a set of double doors, ancient wood painted black, bound by brass hinges. Red talismans clung to the surface, brittle with age. She turned slowly, veil stirring, and though her face remained hidden, I felt her gaze burn through me. "Enter," she whispered. "The hall awaits." I hesitated. My heart pounded against my ribs, urging me to flee. But behind me the corridor had vanished. There was no way back, only forward. The doors groaned open. A rush of cold air swept past me, carrying the scent of roses long decayed. Inside stretched a wedding hall. Red lanterns hung in rows, casting trembling light. Tables were laid with offerings, porcelain bowls, wilted flowers, candles dripping wax like frozen tears. At the far end stood an altar draped in silk, and before it, rows of figures. They wore veils of red. They stood in silence. They waited. Among them, I saw Daniel. His veil was torn, his eyes hollow, yet he lifted his head toward me. For a moment, recognition flickered there. Then it was gone, replaced by the same emptiness as the others. My throat closed. I wanted to call his name, but no sound emerged. The woman in red glided to the altar. She raised her arms and the procession turned toward me. "Now you join," she whispered. "Now you vow." I stepped backward, clutching the silk fragment tighter. Its warmth grew, almost burning. I remembered the old man's warning. Never banish, only delay. Was this the delay he meant? The final moment, when choice itself is swallowed? The lanterns flickered. The veiled figures began to move, their steps echoing in unison. The procession advanced, slow and relentless, toward where I stood. The woman raised her hand, pointing at me. Red silk uncoiled from the altar like living thread, winding through the hall, reaching for my wrists. I pressed the fragment of silk against my chest. For an instant, the hall flickered. The figures shuddered, their veils trembling. But the thread did not stop. It wrapped around my arms, my throat, my breath. The woman's whisper filled my skull. "The corridor has only one end. You are already walking it." The last thing I saw before darkness fell was her veil lifting slightly. Not enough to reveal her face, only enough to show the void where a face should be. And then the doors closed. When I awoke, I was back in my room. The oil lamp burned low, its flame trembling like a dying breath. For a moment I told myself it had been a dream, that the corridor, the altar, the procession were nothing but visions born of fear. But then I saw my notebook. It lay open on the desk. On the last page was my name, Michael Green, written not once but dozens of times, each in a different hand. Some neat, some jagged, some blurred, as though copied by trembling fingers. And below them, one final line. "The last name is yours." I staggered to the mirror, praying it would show only me. But the glass was not glass anymore. It was the corridor. The procession marched on. Veils swayed, lanterns burned. At the head walked the woman in red. She carried my notebook in her hands. Each time she turned a page, another name dissolved into smoke. When she reached the final page, she paused. She lifted her head, veil stirring, and though her face was hidden, I knew she was looking at me. Her voice slipped through the glass. "You wrote yourself. You belong." I tried to tear the page from the notebook, but the ink burned into the paper like blood. I tried to rip the whole book apart, but my hands would not obey. They shook violently, then stilled, as if held by unseen threads. On the desk, the comb I had found in Daniel's room appeared again. Its teeth were whole now, polished, gleaming. A strand of hair coiled around it. Not his, not hers. Mine. That night the knocking returned. Not at the window. Not at the door. From inside the wardrobe. 3 slow knocks. Then silence. I pressed my ear to the wood. Faintly I heard it. The clack of heels pacing within, and the murmur of countless voices whispering names that faded as they were spoken. When I tore the wardrobe open, only my own reflection stared back, distorted across endless rows of red veils hanging inside. The next morning I left the hotel, or at least I tried. At the front desk, the receptionist looked puzzled. "Check out. Sir, we don't have you in our system." I insisted. Showed her my passport. She shook her head gently. "This isn't yours. The name doesn't match." I looked down. The passport no longer said Michael Green. The letters twisted before my eyes, forming characters I did not recognize. When I raised my head, the receptionist was gone. The lobby was empty. The lanterns above flickered red. I returned to my room. What else could I do? The notebook lay waiting. The page was almost filled now. My name repeated until the lines blurred, until ink dripped down the paper like veins. I wrote once more, desperately, carving the letters with all the strength I had left. I am still here. I remember. The ink spread, then vanished, absorbed into the paper. For a moment, silence. Then the whisper came, soft, certain. Not for long. That night I dreamed of the wedding hall again. This time I stood among them, my veil heavy on my head, my breath shallow beneath the cloth. Daniel stood beside me. He did not speak. He did not need to. The bride raised her hands. The procession bowed. I felt the silk tighten around my wrists, pulling me forward. When I awoke, my notebook was gone. In its place lay a single sheet of paper. On it, written in red ink, was one sentence. "Tell this, and the next will carry it." I understood then. That was the purpose. Not to keep me silent, but to make me speak. To pass the story on, to carve the vow into new ears, new hands. The curse survives because it is remembered. So now I write this for you. Not because I believe it will save me. My name is already fading. I can feel it each time I try to speak it aloud. Less sound, less weight. Soon I will be nothing but a veil among many. But perhaps if you read this, if you remember, then some part of me lingers. And perhaps if you follow the corridor, if you see the woman in red waiting at the end, you will know not to take the final step. The lantern outside my window flickers. The mirror shivers faintly. I hear the clack of heels drawing closer. The last page is almost full. And the last name is mine. Thanks for watching the whole video. Please give me a like and subscribe to the channel to watch more interesting stories.